So welcome to the presentation tonight at the West Michigan Lakeshore SOLIDWORKS Users Group. We're going to be talking about SOLIDWORKS and Counterpart, bills of material, properties, and how Counterpart integrates with SOLIDWORKS. Here's a little bit about me. Been around, did things, made things, designed things, taught things, stuff. Everything around SOLIDWORKS somehow. My goal and all of my lectures and training is that everybody learns something. So if you leave and you learn something, then I think we're reasonably successful in that. I like to challenge perspectives a lot, whether it's industry or preconceived or whatnot. So you might get some of that. My opinion, so take it or leave it. If you don't like anything that's presented here, I'll give you your full entrance money back, guarantee. So just contact me at the end, no problem.
Double it.
Double it, yeah, I mean, sure. Just don't divide by it, that causes a crash. So the first thing here is understanding SOLIDWORKS properties and where they're stored. So if anybody's ever gone to like file properties or a hotkey or something in SOLIDWORKS, you're familiar with the summary information, and then there's a custom and configuration specific tab. So all of the properties are stored in SOLIDWORKS files. The drawing files don't have a configuration specific, there's no configurations for drawings. So from a 3D model standpoint, it would look like this, and drawings wouldn't have the configuration specific. So the summary is really like a Windows system data level type thing where you got like the author of who made it and that kind of stuff. I don't really see people use summary to hand type in or store really critical data for what they're trying to enter. In the custom tab and configuration specific, which I don't know if I have a screenshot of, we'll see it in SOLIDWORKS, is a list view, kind of think Excel, where you have a column of what the property is, a column of what type it is, the value, and then the equated value. And then the configuration specific is a property specific for one configuration. So if you're not familiar with configurations, Greg Dawes is doing a presentation out back that should be recorded. So you can go watch that, or he's doing advanced configuration second session as well. The configurations are kind of like, think split personality file. A SOLIDWORKS file can simultaneously be a square block and a round cylinder. Depends on how you leverage the software. So a lot of the common properties that we would all think about or remember using would be like descriptions and materials and weights, volumes, manufacturer, that kind of stuff. So when we use the properties in SOLIDWORKS, a lot of them, for the most part, 99 percentile, are stored on the 3D SOLIDWORKS model, and then the drawing looking at that model references those properties. So in this title block, for example, this is the file name, this is the description that's in the 3D model. This sheet size is specific to the drawing, and you have material and finish and revision, so on and so forth. And we can quickly see that here, where if I open up this part, and go to the properties. So here's the summary tab that we're talking about. Here's the custom tab. So these are all the properties specific to that SOLIDWORKS file. And here's the configuration specific tab. These would be specific to this configuration. This particular model only has one configuration. But then when we go to look at the SOLIDWORKS drawing of this block, we'll see that those properties here bleed through into that title block. Now the really cool thing with Counterpart here on the side, so this is Counterpart, the SOLIDWORKS add-in on the right-hand side here of the software. The really nice thing with Counterpart is I can change the values of any property that's stored in the system. So side support, maybe we just change that to plate instead of plural. So if I hit save and update my drawing, the S disappears off the description. But in reality what's happening is the Counterpart add-in is modifying the property here, maybe here, is modifying the property here in the 3D model. Nope, modifying the property here in the 3D model. So the other thing, look at the PowerPoint. So property hierarchy, the next point. When SOLIDWORKS goes to look for a property, so we make a drawing of that part in SOLIDWORKS has a description property here under configuration specific, and it has a description property here under the custom. So when it is shown on the drawing, which value is used, right? Because you got two identical property values in the model. And the way that it works is the configuration tab is always checked first. So if you ask SOLIDWORKS, what is the description for this model? If there's a value in the configuration tab will win and SOLIDWORKS will get that value. If there's no value in the configuration tab, it'll ask the custom tab. And if there's no value in the custom tab, it won't give you anything. So we'll look at that here a minute. So let's change the description here to just say the custom tab. And here, let's change it to say the configuration, if I can spell. All right, so I've manually changed those properties. If we go look at the drawing for this now, we'll see that it now says configuration tab, because the configuration tab has a value in the properties. If I delete that value, it'll now revert and default back to the custom tab. And we'll see that if we go back to the drawing. It's now the custom tab. And if we delete that out, and we go back, there's no description at all. So when you're adding a description to a SOLIDWORKS file, when you're adding a description to a SOLIDWORKS file, the key takeaways here are you add a property to the SOLIDWORKS file. The key takeaways are add properties to the 3D model. Try to avoid adding properties to the drawing when at all possible. The 3D model should really be your master record. And if you add a property to the configuration specific tab here, it'll always overwrite or overrule the custom tab. So I've had a lot of tech support phone calls where like, I'm changing the property, I deleted the property, I remade the property, I modified the property, and it won't work. The drawing doesn't change. And it's because if there's anything on the configuration tab, it'll always win in a hierarchical battle. Does that make sense? Or any questions? Have we all used properties in SOLIDWORKS before? Some of us. All right. So, and it's done that way because let's pretend that I had two configurations where, let me add another configuration with whole. And then if I do it without whole, suppress that. So this is configurations in SOLIDWORKS. I can have in the same model the part, so I'm not opening any file. This is all DGF 011. So I can have this with a hole and without a hole. And when I go to my properties, I will have a different set of properties with a hole and without a hole. I can have. So if this description I can do with hole, and if I switch back to the other configuration properties, it does not have that. So I could say without hole. If we go back to our drawing, we'll see that now this says without hole, but if I was to change my drawing view to the hole, it'll now say with hole. So if my drawing is looking at the part that has the hole, it'll use that hole's configuration specific description property. If my drawing is looking at the part without a hole, it'll use the configuration property without the hole. So this is how you're able to get like a single part file that's configured 1,000 times for bolts and sizes and lengths and threads and all kinds of things, vice handles, whatever you want. And you can have different properties based on the different geometric representation of each configuration in your SOLIDWORKS model. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Yes, sir.
So, just so I understand this correctly, in terms of project numbers, because we name our files by project number.
Okay.
So we'll take an earlier project, pretty much copy and paste it to a new project.
Yep.
And then for some reason, design forgets to change to the new project number, and the old project number is still on the drawings. Is there one way to just be able to change that one cell so that it reflects all the way through?
Are the project numbers in the file name or are they in a property?
Well, that's question number 2. Would we have to do it a certain way that we could by just changing one aspect? It changes it all throughout the file.
Without seeing your files, there's no easy answer. I'll gladly answer it. Just email me or call me up or whatever. I mean, you know how to get hold of me.
Yeah.
So I'll gladly stop by or help out. I don't have an easy answer for you without seeing what you're actually, the files look like.
Yeah, because I see that what you're doing at the properties, and we have that summary right there.
Okay.
We include the project number
Okay.
in that summary. And I was just wondering if,
There are ways to automatically bulk update property values. So there might be an automated task to update 200 properties in a file set without having to do it manually.
right,
but-
that's what I'm looking at.
Yep, we could,
Do that for task scheduler.
yeah, and we'll,
Task scheduler?
That's what.
yep, and if you need help with that, feel free to contact me anytime and I'll gladly help you with that. So here we have configurations and properties per configuration. So let's see what I'm supposed to be doing next in my PowerPoint. Oh yeah, okay, so no properties on drawings, that's bad. Properties on models, that's good. So here's how the property structure works. The properties are pretty much always stored in the SOLIDWORKS 3D model. So we have SOLIDWORKS properties that can be influenced by that 3D model. The SOLIDWORKS drawings point to the SOLIDWORKS 3D model and get their properties, SOLIDWORKS PDM, SOLIDWORKS BOMs, etc., etc. So if we look at now a assembly, so let's open up a quick assembly. So here's an assembly, and if we look at the drawing for that assembly, we'll see in the bill of material here that it's pulling, oh, not misformatted somehow, that this description value is pulling the description. Now, when it goes, and we can only have one description value per item in the bill of material, per item in the drawing. So when it says, SOLIDWORKS, give me the description for this item in my 3D model, it will follow that hierarchy and say, does the description exist on the configuration? If not, if yes, use it. If not, does the description exist on the custom tab? If yes, then use it. If not, then you get no description. And the same thing happens with PDM, basically. It'll, PDM depends on what kind and version stuff. You can see the properties per file or per configuration. So you can kind of get both of those there. So getting into the counterpart side, the nice thing that we do with counterpart, and this is the actual counterpart side of things, is if I need to change this description, the old way of doing it would be to right click and open this model so that I can launch properties, so that I can change the description here to, we'll just add a part there, so that I can close my file and save it to go back to my drawing and rebuild so I can get my eye bolt part. That's the old way of doing it. Several years ago, I'm going to say like 2014 or something, SOLIDWORKS allowed you to double click in here and it'll warn you. This cell is linked to a property in an external model, because that's how everything in SOLIDWORKS is parametrically linked. Do you want to keep that link, and what I change here will change back to that 3D model, or do you want to break it? Breaking it is a very bad thing, because in your bill of material is basically an Excel table, right? Your bill of material doesn't mean what the SOLIDWORKS means. If you change SOLIDWORKS, it doesn't update, so that's bad. Don't do that. You can keep your link, and you can say, don't show me this is going to keep the link, which is recommended. So now if I take off part and green check, if I go open up that part and look at its properties again, that part, the name part has disappeared. It's back to the original description. So everything in SOLIDWORKS is parametrically linked. It's all in like the background code, right? We got arrows and stuff pointing all over the place. And the BOM looks at the 3D model, and if you change it, keeping it linked, the 3D model will update the property and vice versa. So all of that is interlinked. In Counterpart, now the one downside of the BOM is that you're not able to change from the drawing the description of your base model. You can change things in the BOM, but the base model here, the base assembly, we don't have the way to change unless we go open up that base assembly. Unless somebody knows something I don't know, but as far as I know, you can. The cool thing with Counterpart, though, is that we have a full live bill of material here on the right-hand side. So you can see we're using 2 McMaster car screws here. And I can find, what is that, 196. So here they are. 832. So from here, I can change this from long screw and hit save. Inside a counterpart, I'm saving that new updated property back to the 3D model, which if I just go back to my drawing and rebuild, I now get the screw down there because the drawing refreshed and pulled the new value from the 3D model to put it back on the drawing. The exact same thing can be done to the parent assembly. So base fixture assembly, we'll say that it's a base fixture assembly. We'll add aluminum to the front of that. So I hit save, rebuild my drawing, and this has now been updated without having to go open up that 3D model, change that property value, and come back into the drawing. So that's the advantage of Counterpart in that context. The other advantage of Counterpart is if you do click on something like a McMaster-Carr item, you'll see that we actually ask for the description and the part, or the manufacturer and the manufacturer part number, versus a regular detail is just asking for like material or finish. So in Counterpart, you're able to specify what properties you want for what types of components. And if you have engineers who aren't like super fantastic at always typing in those values, in Counterpart you can put limits in there and say, well, you can't do something unless you give me a property. And you can regulate a lot of that considerably better. All right. And properties are admittedly the boring part. We'll get to the BOMs, which is a lot more exciting. So generic explanation, Counterpart extends the ability of SOLIDWORKS property management through the drawings and through the assemblies. The nice thing is, from a Counterpart standpoint, if you don't have the drawing open and you don't have the bill of material and you don't want to link through there, from the assembly level here, when I click on the item in Counterpart, it will highlight and dynamically zoom all of the items that I have in my graphics view, and it will highlight them in my feature tree. And I can change the value, so I can do type 3 anodize and hit save. I've now updated the property on that component from my assembly graphics view. The other nice thing is inside a Counterpart, we have the ability to pull up DGF-016. We have the ability to pull up records that were synced from SOLIDWORKS. Now anybody using Counterpart that has this software on their computer, they can see everything we see on the screen without having SOLIDWORKS installed on your computer. So you have a guy in the shop doing purchasing, doing manufacturing, doing inventory control, building, making, machining, welding, anything. They can use Counterpart here, which is very lightweight, easy to use, and see an image of the model and all of the properties of the model specified in SOLIDWORKS. Better yet, if we go here and we update this to type 3 hard anodize and hit save, instantly through the Counterpart add-in, if we refresh this record here, the type 3 now added hard. So it's faster than the SOLIDWORKS side where you'd have to reprint out that print, redistribute it to somebody. If I change the value in SOLIDWORKS, it's now changed in Counterpart near instantaneously. The advantage here is if somebody has a question on the shop floor and they can gain access to the Counterpart information, they instantly have the answer without having to go ask engineering or modify or pull a SOLIDWORKS license. Any questions so far? It's really hard to talk about properties for an hour, so I'm hoping you guys ask some questions so that I can give some answers so I don't have to power through my PowerPoint.
On that previous view that you had, can you have dimensions on that picture? Like overall dimensions as well, or not?
You can. It's a good question, and if the dimensions were important, we would, at the end of my next presentation, if I have the time, we're going to start talking about PDM integration and pulling PDM data and all that kind of thing, and that might be a better answer for the question that you're asking. But if you did want to do it and you're religious about it, it is possible to add DimX dimensions inside your graphics view, so it looks something like that. Right? This is like MBD for poor people. That's a Peggy joke. But if you did something like this, and well, we'd have to isometric this. ISO. So it looked like that. So if you put dimensions on your screen, and they would come in. Not evidently very well. So all we're doing is we're putting a zoom to fit on the model in an isometric view and taking a picture of that. So whatever is there is there. And then if you even have dimensions and hide them, then your model would update accordingly.
I have a question on your assembly.
Yes, Peggy.
What if you put another one of those parts in that has more than one configuration? How well does it handle a different configuration of the same part in the assembly?
It's a very good question. And in my PowerPoint, oh, I keep doing that. Somewhere. When we talk about the BOMs, that's the magic answer. So from a property standpoint, because you have the bill of material display options and stuff, which we'll get to here shortly. So I will answer the question just in a little bit to stay on topic, or stay on track. So the nice thing is, if we look at this earlier one, we have the SOLIDWORKS file with 4 SOLIDWORKS type property use and applications pointing at that SOLIDWORKS file, which is inside the SOLIDWORKS ecosystem how that works. With Counterpart, we have the identical 4 objects pointing at the SOLIDWORKS file, so nothing there changes. And then with Counterpart, we have the Counterpart add-in, which then saves additional information in the SQL database, which is accessible through the Counterpart desktop. So we can see that here in Counterpart, where I can get access to all of this information without needing to have SOLIDWORKS, including images and other things. Does that make sense? All right. Oh, sweet. So I got through properties. Load off my mind. Any questions on properties? That all work?
If you want to do a property that's the length of the block or the size of the box.
Yep.
That the part fits in.
Yep.
Can you do that?
Absolutely. So the answer is twofold. The first answer is from a SolidWorks standpoint, how in SolidWorks do you do that? The way that you do that in SolidWorks, and I'm going to have to add some properties, so please pardon all the rapid clicking. So I'm just going to add a length, width, and height property values.
You're adding that in the properties?
We populated those properties as options. You can put as many as you want in, and you can check them to be associated with any one of the components that you want.
So here in SolidWorks, we have a length, width, and height property. And this is 100% SolidWorks functionality. We can take the width and tie that to the length and the height. So in native SolidWorks, we can have the width to be a 1/2 inch, the length to be 6, and the height to be 4 3/4. Now in SolidWorks, if I change this from 4 to 5, and I go back into my SolidWorks or my properties, that will change from 4 3/4 to 5. So all of this is a native SolidWorks functionality. The advantage is if you do that, then inside of Counterpart, we're capturing the same values. 5 inches, 1/2, and then 6. So I'm going to change this back real quick to 4 3/4 so I don't blow up other things. And you can see here in Counterpart, it's saving all of that. So now, the SolidWorks side of it, yes, you can do that today. You can tie all that together, no problem at all. The cool thing from the Counterpart side is if we go back to that model and watch when I refresh on the left-hand side, we'll have the properties appear if I had the right model open. Love it when that happens. Let's try that once more. So the refresh thing doesn't work, but we have the height, width, and length. So now anybody in the company who needs to make that part, cut it out of stock, machine it out of mill, purchase it, buy it, get the material, whatever it might be, from Counterpart, they can gain access to all that information without needing SolidWorks or 2D print at all.
What happens if they decide to go in there and they've only got a certain size material available, so they want to make it out of that instead?
Okay.
And change it in your Counterpart?
Yep, great question. So in Counterpart, you are probably noticing the Edit Properties button. So I can click the Edit Properties button, but nothing is editable if the property is tied to SolidWorks. So I can add a property that's not tied to SolidWorks, perhaps notes, and type whatever I want. But notes won't save back to SolidWorks. So if we get the value from SolidWorks, it's SOLIDWORKS only and there's no touching allowed. If the value is in counterpart, then you can kind of do whatever you want. So if it's a SOLIDWORKS property, counterpart just reads it. If it's a counterpart property, you can read and write it. And in the desktop side and the SOLIDWORKS add-in side, you can do whatever you want. Good question though.
Well, you know, all those people out on the floor sometimes.
Yeah, right. And I mean, obviously, if we allow them to have that power, that's pretty dangerous, right? If they're like, you know what, I'm gonna make that 5. Right? You're not updating prints, you're not updating designs, you're not updating your assembly, you're not updating anything, and that would be very dangerous. Looks like you had a question, Radar? Nope. Okay. So, bills of material. Bills of material. One of my favorite subjects ever. So the bill of material is a way in SOLIDWORKS to automatically generate basically a list of stuff that's in a given assembly for outside consumption. One of the ways I like to explain it is if we just design something in CAD and hit print and we 3D printed it all, nobody would ever use a bill of material. A bill of material is really a communication tool that's used for everybody that's not a designer. Designers don't really care. We add them to our drawings because our bosses tell us to, not because we want to. And it's really a downstream communication method. So some of the options that we have in SOLIDWORKS specific to bills of material is every configuration has the ability to show the bill of material, report the bill of material to SOLIDWORKS as the document name minus the extensions, as the configuration name, or as a user specified name. And we'll see that here in SOLIDWORKS. So we'll open this file again. The nice thing about Counterpart here is it gives us a live bill of material view. So this DGF 0-011 is what SOLIDWORKS is reporting the bill of material value to be for this particular model. Normally you'd have to open up a drawing and then have a bill of material to see what this is, and we can see it live here in the add-in. So if I go to my configuration tab, I'm just going to delete my without holes one. We'll leave it because Peggy asked that question. So if I go to my property or my configuration here and go to properties, and this is, everyone has this in SOLIDWORKS today, and I change it from document name to configuration name, we can see the bill of material options here is going to update and show me default. So if I rebuild and refresh, we can now see that it says default, which means if I go back to my drawing, you'll see that item number 2 here, highlighted in the balloon and in purple or magenta or whatever that is in the graphics view, item number 2 says it's default. The part number is default. Now this is kind of a big problem where if you have a bill of material and it says default, your guy on the shop floor, your purchaser, somebody is going to look for default.sldprt on your server or something and not be able to find it. Because default doesn't exist as a file. It's a configuration name inside of a SOLIDWORKS file. So we'll talk about when that is practical to do, but certainly in this instance, that's not going to be that helpful. I can also, to make it even more confusing, change this from document or configuration to user specified, which means I can type in whatever I want. So now I have a document called DGF 011, I have a configuration called defaults, and I have a bill of material value called whatever I want. This is a great way to confuse everybody on the shop floor. It's kind of a fun joke until they, come back and don't think it's funny. But it's an important thing to understand how it works, but you also have to understand how it can go bad very quickly. Now, one of the practical uses of this, and I think I have it somewhere in this model, but I don't remember where. It's been a while since I designed this. So these two end plates, they are slightly different. This radius here is a little bit smaller than this radius here. So pretend that I wanted one SOLIDWORKS part file for these two end plates. So then that way I can tie the thickness, tie the description, tie the hole patterns for the bolt holes. And I just have to change that radius and that placement. So I don't think I did that here, but pretend, oh, I did. Looky there. I don't know why I didn't check first. Anyway, sorry, it's been a long day. So here in the SOLIDWORKS part file, We have DGF-002. So that's like the prefixed part number. DGF is the job and 002 is the detail. And we have a -X. So in the SOLIDWORKS file name, we have a -X which delineates a unknown extension variable. Then in our configurations, we have 002-1 and 002-0. So as I switch configurations here, you can see that that geometry is updating accordingly. And when I go back to my bill of material, I have, nope, not that bill of material. Go back here. Anyway, anybody have an idea what this machine is? What it does? Nobody? Extra bonus points. I'll give you anything on the table except my phone and laptop, if you can figure it out by the end of the presentation. We'll flip back and forth. There might be in a description somewhere, so maybe somebody can cheat that way. But you can see here I have 0020 and 0021 as two different items in my bill of material. The bill of material display options are configuration. So if we open up this part, back to the configuration tab, I have a singular part file saved on my computer with two different geometric and two different records in my bill of material. Now, from an internal company standpoint, what's just important to know is if I'm searching for this file, I just have to know that I search for the file before the last dash, and I'll find that file in a -X. Then if I open up the right configuration or the right drawing that points at the right configuration, everything works. Which also means that if I do the typical right-click in space and open drawing, SOLIDWORKS is going to say, hey, look, here's your drawing. Oh, I cheated on this drawing. I showed both views, so you can see it's big and small. I should have had two different drawings. I think I was just saying this with laser and being lazy. Sometimes you do that with contract work. But the drawing here, the drawing name is -X, and it's representing two different, the rear retainer and the front retainer, as two different pieces of geometry, each made quantity 1 for that one part in that one assembly. That make sense? So so these are those options. And here here's the example part -X. So we have a part -L, part -R. And if I was to go look for that SOLIDWORKS file, I would not be able to find a SOLIDWORKS part or assembly in this instance called part -L. It would be part -X. And the configurations would be L and R, and I have two drawings, one L, one R, that would point to the right configurations. It's not as confusing as it sounds the first time. Has anybody sat through configurations like this, bill of material display options? Does anybody in this room have zero experience with what I'm talking about? 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's not as confusing as it sounds if you have ever used it or get to it. But then the third option here is user specify, like I said, manually entered value. So you can see in one document of the example configurations document, it can show up as configuration, show up as document, and show up as user specified name, all in the same assembly of the same bill of material. Now the cool thing is Counterpart fully honors all of this. So we can see here in this assembly, I have 4 unique items, a bolt, 2 end caps, and the center contoured part. Even though the 2 end caps are the same SOLIDWORKS file, Counterpart recognizes them as 001 and 002, or these two, right? 0 and 01. Part end retainer, and this is a detail. That's part end retainer as well. So does that answer your question, Peggy? Took a while to get there, but we got there. So whatever the SOLIDWORKS bill of material here, Counterpart will show you the same thing. The advantage of Counterpart is you don't have to have the drawing to do it, and from here you can manage your files and manage your properties and do everything that you need to do without actually opening up or having a drawing. So it's a very good way to iteratively validate your design without having to switch through and open a bunch of documents. And every single time that we are validating that design and putting in this data, we're able to go into Counterpart, which I'll show you a little bit more of later. And so here's the file, right? Without any extra work, any extra effort, I can get all of this data extracted from SOLIDWORKS, saved into Counterpart, and utilized throughout my organization without having everybody to pull a SOLIDWORKS license. So the really cool thing about Counterpart 2, specific to bills of material, is bills of material all show a parent and children. So the definition of a bill of material is here's an object and here are the sub-objects that make up that object. And that's kind of what I was saying, like it's a great communication device to push that data outside the engineering department. If we just hit printed and printed everything, we won't use bills. So in Counterpart, we have the ability to extract even more information from a Counterpart standpoint and disseminate that throughout the organization. So for example, if I look up this part number, and I'm going to try to find DGF02, Counterpart can't find it. It doesn't exist. And the reason is because here in the Counterpart add-in, I did not yet click the sync button. So SOLIDWORKS knows what's on the screen exists. Counterpart does not. So I click sync. So now here in Counterpart, if I search for this again, it will show me the assembly. Now, if I click on relationships, it'll show me the BOM of that assembly because I synced over all of that critical data. Not only the components, the component properties, the component image, also if it's an assembly, the component's children. So this assembly has those children. And I can click on them and I can see the image, the properties of each file. I can also double click on any one of those files and navigate to it. So here's my screw. And because Counterpart is a relational database, it will also show me parents of this file. So this particular screw is used in this assembly, which is the same assembly we're looking at, just different subassembly, and this assembly. So I can now double click on here and see that one. So I can literally browse in back and forward buttons, just like you would expect in like a web browser. So you can literally browse parents and children through the Counterpart software without having SOLIDWORKS or PDM, all through the bill of material data that we're syncing. Now the last bit of information is, notice that in my screenshot here, I have this customer part, and I have it here in my SOLIDWORKS graphics, but I don't have it in my bill of material. Right? And these 4 items do not represent that customer data. And the reason is because that customer data has an option called exclude from bill of material. So any item anywhere in your tree structure at any time, you can choose the exclude from bill of material option, and it will just simply not show up in your bill of material at all. If I uncheck this and say OK, Counterpart's going to refresh and say, hey guys, this is a new item that doesn't already exist, and you have conflicts where your old structure were these items, and this is a new item. The old quantity was 0, the new quantity is 1. Do you want to do a revision? Do you want to modify something? Did you make a mistake? What do you want to do about it? So I can flip this flag back to exclude children and refresh, and that item is, for all intents and purposes, pretended to not exist. It does not there. It's excluded from the bill of material, even though geometrically it's still in my SOLIDWORKS assembly, and I'm still utilizing it for external references, for nest fixturing, and everything else. So if you ever design something, you insert a customer part and it shows up in your bill of material, you have to hide it or delete it, or you export your bill of material and delete it out of the Excel, or email it to your purchaser and say, buy me all this, but not item 3, I don't know how to get rid of it, however that is. The magic button there is properties on the file, exclude from bill of material, and it won't show up in your bill of material anymore. Sir?
When you click that button, does the weight of that part show up in your assembly, or is that weight then deleted?
Good question. Under the Evaluate tab for mass properties, there is a, not what I'm looking for, might be envelope. Yeah, there's an include for hidden, but assuming I want to see it, what I'm thinking of is, well, let's find out. So right now it says the mass is 0.2 pounds. I don't know what all my materials are set at. I think envelope might be what you're looking for. If you go to envelope and you run it again, it's 0.17. So the envelope option does two things. Great question, slightly off topic. No problem, we'll cover it. We got the time, right? We got 10 minutes. So what the envelope option does, and I don't know why they call it envelope, and there's not a whole lot of really great documentation for it. But the envelope basically means, and again, I don't know why they picked the term, but it basically means here's a item that I don't need, that I don't want, that doesn't exist in the assembly, but I need from a geometric design use standpoint. So exclude it from the bill of material, exclude it from mass, and automatically make it transparent. Notice that. So if I use, so any assembly that it shows up in, it will look transparent like that and not be included in any of the values, the properties, the mass, the weight, anything like that. And again, I don't know why they picked envelope. The term doesn't make sense to me. Also in the graphics view, it puts it in an envelope. That's the only thing that makes sense, but they could have picked any icon, so I don't know. Sure.
I think it shows up weird in the drawing too.
Yeah.
Show up in your drawing, I don't remember.
Well,
I tried using it before, I didn't get the result I wanted, so.
so it won't show up in my drawing because I've manually excluded it, which is another thing we could talk about, I suppose. If you go to properties of any graphics or any drawing view, you can show or hide components. So if you have, like in this instance, right, when I send it out to the shop floor and I want them to make this assembly, I don't want to show the customer part. A, because then it's going to scale way down weird because the customer part's a lot bigger than my assembly. But B, because when I'm making this, when I'm machining it, when I'm assembling it, the customer part is totally irrelevant to my goals at my particular goals at that particular moment. So in SolidWorks, per graphics view, you can hide whatever you want. So I'll delete one of these hidden selections and see where this shows up. If it shows up. Did I envelope that? So if I unenvelope that, go back to the drawing, there it goes. So I just right-clicked and went properties on the drawing and then do show hide components. And you can just pick them right out of your graphics view. And you're able to hide whatever you want, which is, again, a totally different independent settings than your bill of material. So you can kind of get in trouble with it if you hide something that is in the bill of material, then the bill of material can't find it, and it gets also confusing. So the envelope is a good option for that. I just don't like envelopes because I don't like the transparency of it, and it's irritating to look at, so I'm just not in the habit of using that. But if I did use it, my drawing would have been easier.
I usually make a configuration that doesn't show the parts.
Yep, that would work. If you do suppress it, then sometimes I used a bunch of external references here to,
I don't suppress it, I just hide it. Configuration.
oh,
Hidden.
yeah, you could also do that with display states. So you could do a configuration, or with the same configuration, you could add a display state. And in the display state, you could hide that, and then your other display state can show that. Display states are like 1/1000th the weight of a configuration. So with a configuration, you can't screw up your bill of material, you can't screw up your drawing, you can't screw up a bunch of other things or external references. But in the display states, it's just a graphical display difference. And you can also use that in your drawing. If I go back to my properties and clear the selection of my components, here you can pick a display state 2, which will hide it as well. So display state is identical to configuration, but it does like colors and textures and visibility and transparency of 3D models. It doesn't change any of the bill of material options. And the configuration, singular configuration, is a lot more lightweight and easier to use in a given assembly than two configurations. But there's, as in SOLIDWORKS, there's a million ways to skin any given CAD you want. So these are our configuration options from a naming standpoint, where they're named, how they show up, and what they do. The next one is the bill of material options. This is also fun. In each SOLIDWORKS assembly, and this is key, it is available, the SOLIDWORKS assembly options here are more complete, or there's more of them than the options in a part. So notice the options here are less than in the assembly. And the main differences in the assembly, we have this bill of material options per configuration in an assembly. It's the same. So the bill of material options here, the name is the same, but the child component display, when used as a subassembly, is the key thing that's different. And what's different about that is the show will show the children. So the definition of any assembly is the sum, placement, and quantity of its components. If you made an assembly in SOLIDWORKS and there's no children, there would be nothing, the assembly would be empty and void, right? It'd be a null assembly. So when you make a bill of material for an assembly, the bill of material is basically saying, what children do you have? That's the children I'm going to show. And the show option here will show the children and it will recurse through the structure. The hide option hides the children. So an assembly with no children, an assembly with its children hidden, is from a SOLIDWORKS bill of material standpoint, effectively a part. So you can convert SOLIDWORKS assemblies into SOLIDWORKS parts at the bill of material level, not at the file structure and relational level. That's an important difference to understand. And then promote basically dissolves the subassembly at its higher level in utilization of a bill of material and pretends that the subassembly doesn't exist. That's kind of fraught with a bunch of problems. I see very little use of it in industry and not highly recommended, but it is an option. And I took a screenshot, so I kind of had to talk about all the options. And we'll look at that here in SOLIDWORKS. And the example, the good real-life practical example for that, yes, sir?
I use it.
The promote? All right.
I do a BOM when I'm trying to have all these sub-assemblies and I want to promote it up in one bill of material.
Yep.
That's when I use it.
So why wouldn't you just do parts only on the bill of material options?
I don't know, it doesn't do what I want to do.
Okay. Well, when we get to that, I'd pick your brain and see what you think about it. But that's certainly a use case I haven't come across yet. So here inside of Counterpart, I have a subassembly, or here inside of SOLIDWORKS, I'm sorry. I have a subassembly that is a linear slide that looks like so. And we'll look more at the main assembly and what we're actually trying to accomplish. But we got this slide. So when I download this from McMaster-Carr, I really want two independent part files on my hard drive so that I can animate, kinematically move that slide. That's important to me from a design standpoint. But I do not want to show this as an assembly from McMaster-Carr in my bill of material, because if I ask McMaster-Carr to get me these two items, which is the exact McMaster-Carr part number, -1, and the exact McMaster-Carr part number, -2, McMaster-Carr is going to, I mean, they're super helpful, so they'd probably try to help me, but they're going to basically tell me that number doesn't exist, give me a real number. But if I go to my bill of material display options and I say hide the children, then those children don't exist and only the parent exists in the form of a part. So if we look at the subassembly and look at it in Counterpart, we can see that this slide option here is referenced as a singular part. So we can kind of see the part icon there in this Counterpart bill of material preview. If I open up that record, and let's change that now from hide to show, green check again, and go back to the assembly. We'll see that it's now an assembly that has one part of the base slide and then the truck. And this is clear now. And again, the Counterpart add-in here is live showing us a bill of material which is identical to what would happen if you added it to a drawing. There's options, we'll get to that, but if you add it to a drawing. So what we see here is the exact same thing we'd see on the drawing. So the problem exists in both. And this is clearly a problem because if I give a purchaser this bill of material, they're going to try to purchase the parts so that we can make the assembly, which is not what we want in this instance. I can't purchase those two parts to make that assembly because McMaster doesn't sell them that way. What I want to do is hide the children so that I am able to purchase this one singular part, which when it comes in the box, there's two kinematically independent movement items. That's indiscriminate of the bill of material. So now I can purchase this one item which has these two parts and put it into my assembly. So that's a really good I mean, so slides and cylinders, and like if it's a 12 millimeter prox and you got like the nuts or something that you can mate to get it in the right position, and all of those applications, the hide children in the bill of material is very, very helpful. So that's the hide, and then promote just does the inverse, right? Instead of hiding the children and pretending the assembly is a part, it hides the assembly and it promotes the children up to the next level. And we can, well.
So what's the advantage of doing that versus leaving it as an assembly with the part number you want?
Because when we typically buy things on a PO, you basically don't ever buy an assembly. That doesn't really happen, right? You buy a singular part, which might be comprised of multiple items. So most ERP systems, most purchasing systems, most BOMs, you work at the part level, and then we make assemblies out of those part levels. And I can't independently buy these two independent parts to put them together to make the slide. If this was like THK Rail, where I bought the rail and I bought the trucks, that's a different discussion. But this entire slide is a singular McMaster car item. Does that make sense?
Didn't answer my question.
Okay.
Why don't you just leave it as an assembly, and call the assembly by the part number from the MasterCard?
Because,
It is, he's just,
yep,
it's pointing at the properties in that assembly rather than at the individual parts.
it is still a SolidWorks assembly. I'm just faking it and saying the bill of material is going to show the SolidWorks assembly as a SolidWorks part. So it's still an assembly. I still get the advantage of the assembly, the kinematic motion, and the geometric aspects of an assembly. I just show it on the bill of material as a part. So there's no indentation. If I go parts only view or indented view, it doesn't drop down and show me those two items.
We do the same thing with actuators.
Pneumatic cylinders, all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So I didn't do like a file save as and save the assembly as a part. It's still an assembly. SolidWorks is tricking its own bill of material to say that it's a part. So in Counterpart here, if I sync this item into Counterpart and sync the assembly, so let's quickly pull this up. So the assembly doesn't exist because I haven't synced it yet. So if I look for 06, and under relationships it has no parents. As soon as I sync this assembly, which now took the bill of material and saved that to Counterpart along with all of its associated data, when I refresh this record, I now see that this part belongs to that assembly. So anybody in my organization that has this assembly can see its children, or if it has one of the children, you can find out what assembly it belongs to. So it's your parent-child hierarchy where used. Sir?
You said you wanted to know what that assembly was? It's to guess what it was?
Yes.
So you gave it.
Absolutely. Did the sprue give it off?
Yes.
So I got maybe about 15 minutes left, and what's next? Oh, bombs, perfect. We'll get to Radar's question. But yeah, so this is an injection mold sprue with the two parts. And so here's your gate. And we'll hide this guard. And so when it's up, this pulls this slide back. But then as it comes down, about to there, this is forced forward. For some reason, it's not forcing forward. It's forced forward by the spring and will crowd that part to the side so that this can come down. Wow, this is really angry for some reason. I don't know why it's not working. It worked earlier. It's always the demo problem, right? It happens. But you can see this blade would come down and then lop that gate off the part. And then they can switch the part, flip the part, and then degate the other side, and the sprue falls down in the hole. So, not sure why that's not working, but should be able to drag it around. So the bill of materials side on the drawings itself. we have several options. In SolidWorks, when you're creating a bill, you have the option to do top level only. And so in Counterpart here, the top level only is demonstrated by seeing, here's an assembly, there's an assembly, assembly, another one, that, and then these two items here. So two random parts on the end. So these are all the top level. So think of the first level, first set of children, right? Not your grandchildren or great-grandchildren, your children. And if we look at this drawing, that's what most drawings have because I want to independently assemble sub-assemblies without having to see more data than necessary. But when I click on this bill of material, back to my PowerPoint, you have three options, three main options and a couple sub-options. You have top level, which is what's being shown here. You can see top level. You have parts only. This is my question to Radar here. If I do parts only, it pretends sub-assemblies do not exist. So it ignores all sub-assemblies and it shows you just the parts, the actual SolidWorks bill of material displayed parts. So that slide that we hid the children on would be a part in this context. And this is the entire parts list that you basically need to buy so that you can assemble your stuff.
I must have had, I have scenarios where it doesn't work.
I believe you. I believe you because the nickname for the program is SolidWorks. So I'm not denying that you have had experience where it didn't work right. But from an official standpoint, that's the option that's supposed to do what you want it to do. So parts only is just a flat list of every part that's in your design. It's a great thing to, like, if you don't have Counterpart and you're not integrated in that way, it's a great thing. You take this, you export it to Excel, email it to your purchaser, send it off to manufacturing. It also gives you a summated total of the parts you need in that assembly to be made.
Does it show, is there a way to show all of them in the hierarchy at the same time?
Yep, so I'm getting there, right? So we have top only, top level only, which is like your children, parts only, assemblies don't exist. And a third option is the indented, which is going to show every level, and in this instance, it's only numbering the top level, and the children are numbered. And so here's our sub options. Then we have detailed numbering, where the children are numbered in indentation by decimal point. So I only have one level of subassembly here, but if you had multiple levels, it'd be 1.3, 0.4, 0.1, 0.7, 27, or whatever your indentation is in your levels. So that's detailed numbering, and you have flat numbering, which ignores the indentation. I'm not really sure how this is useful. And it just goes flat. So 15 might be an assembly, and 16 might be a part of that assembly, and 17 might be another assembly. You have no idea where you are in that structure. So I'm not really sure what that exists for. I've not seen a practical use for it out in industry, but it's an option, and it's fun to click on sometimes. Again, it's one of those, like, if you're trying to play a joke on somebody, right? But anyway. So that's the detailed numbering. Then we have configurations. This is also kind of a problem where if this assembly had more than one configuration, you could be showing configuration 1 on your drawing, and you can have your bill of materials show configuration 2. Again, not something you really want to do. Really messes things up downstream. And then there's part groupings, and this is also very important. There's a lot of moving parts here, right? We talked about configurations, bill of material options, and properties. Now bills of material on drawings that reference that data. And there's some important options here. And here's the configuration. If I had more than one, I could pick different ones. But part groupings. So display as one item number for part groupings at the top level. We have display configurations of the same part as separate items. So that was my two end caps, right? Big and small, or 1 and 0. So the option here is to display those two as separate items. So it's bill of material items 1 and 2. And you can see that we have 48 here. The next option is display all configurations of the same part as one item. If I click this, my bill of material should shrink from 48 to probably 47 because those two end caps, which are distinctly different geometrically, based on the settings, are now saying they're the same. So this is where a lot of people get tripped up because in the bill of material display options of the configurations on the component, you said B01 and B02, or B0 and B1. But then when you make the bill of material on the drawing, you can ignore all that and say, no, you're both the same thing. So there's a lot of options, a lot of settings, some mutually exclusive, and it's important to know what overrides what wins, and how something translates through the hierarchy of the options in the configuration of the model and of the bill of material. I can try to say that again if you need me to. Or any questions or comments on any of that?
I do. I think we'll run out of time to explain it all. I have scenario for it.
Okay.
Chat with
Second session? I with the extra time and you guys haven't asked most questions, we're powering through here, all right? Any other questions or comments that anybody here has on what we've covered so far? And there's more, of course, but so far.
I got a couple questions on the counterpart.
Yes.
If you have that assembly, and an engineer wants to order that assembly minus these 3 parts,
Yep. Ordering is second session, but
okay?
we can get there.
Can you delete or add bill of material items from counterpart on that?
No. This is a read-only view, and there are no options here. So like when I add a bill of material to a drawing, I can pick parts only, I can pick indented, I can pick detailed numbering. But those are all different ways to display a bill of material. It's not modifying the bill of material as in the hierarchy structure. So Counterpart is hard-coded to only honor the legitimate bill of material from the 3D model. It ignores everything on drawings. So the Counterpart functionality here is identical whether I have a drawing or not. So if I have 1 drawing or 10 drawings, and I have 1 drawing with a bill of material or 10 drawings with 10 different bills of material, the Counterpart structure will honor the inherent native structure of the SOLIDWORKS bill of material display options. And I can't like right-click here and add because it's 100% driven from SOLIDWORKS. My SOLIDWORKS model is right, my Counterpart data is right. There's no variation or deviance.
And if I have 2 configurations or 3, 4, can I toggle from counterpart into different configurations or not?
No, from Counterpart, I can right-click and I can open any component that I want from the bill of material. The open button. So I've opened this now from the Counterpart interface, but I don't have the ability to toggle or change or modify or really manipulate the SOLIDWORKS model in any capacity. It just is what you did in SOLIDWORKS. Counterpart, going back to our here, Counterpart is really a nice-to-have assistant that automates and accelerates a lot of your standard functionality in SOLIDWORKS without necessarily getting in the way or doing anything obstructive. And whatever SOLIDWORKS does and says and gives and delivers to Counterpart as a system, it accepts without question. Because SOLIDWORKS is the ruling master document record king controller in this ecosystem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but on your display, you have it going 2 ways, counterpart.
Yep, and the main thing there is basically the properties, right? So we're talking geometric and we're talking bill of material options. But in Counterpart, I can add a property which will save it to SOLIDWORKS and save it to Counterpart. And there's always edge cases, but we're talking generic base case scenarios.
So you're simply saying that 2 ways only with properties.
Yeah, there's a few other clever things that we do, like renaming things. So here, if I go out of my way, I can change the bill of material options through Counterpart as if so if I right-click here and I do properties, I've got these 3 options. We duplicated that functionality in Counterpart, so I have the same options here. So it's not doing anything different or anything special, it's just a different way to do the same thing. But we're just changing what's in SOLIDWORKS and then we're rereading what's in SOLIDWORKS. So it's still SOLIDWORKS is the master king. We're just leveraging the data differently. Any other questions or comments on, where were we? Here, here, here. This is where we were. This is where I was hoping to get by the end of the presentation, which we have 5 minutes. So the business use case for BOMs is to get things made. This is kind of my 3D print comment, where if you just hit print when you're done in an SLA, pooped out your model, nobody would care about bills of material. We need them for assemblies, for reference, for service, etc., and to communicate with other departments. They're also a great cross-referencing record, specifically in the context of Counterpart, because if I save the model and save the BOM and save the properties and save the image in a relational SQL database, then through the interface that's not SOLIDWORKS, I can extract a lot of really valuable data from those records without actually having SOLIDWORKS, having PDM, or anything on my computer. And myself and my entire company can be more productive and connected and share a lot more data and information than without having the tool. And then we can communicate demand for job, and then it's a very complex snapshot of everything that we're trying to accomplish in the SOLIDWORKS model. So the bill of materials can show any data that you have collected in the model via properties. And we'll see that here by, kind of like Excel, if I click on this, I can insert a column to the right, and here I can pick any property that's on any model anywhere in this bill of material. So if I have a let's try to find it here a minute, a manufacturer part number, this is all the manufacturer part numbers, and this particular design is all McMaster car items. So these are all the McMaster car items. So maybe if I right click and I insert column left and I pick a property of manufacturer, this is a great way, if you don't have like Counterpart or you're doing it the old archaic Excel, paper, email method, this is a great way to, then you can sort this, you can hand it off to your purchasing guy and say, here, buy all the McMaster stuff, buy all the pneumatic stuff, buy all the SMC stuff, and you can display all of this data in a bill of material because it's relational, and SOLIDWORKS can extract this data via properties through its structure at any time through the bill of material. And the cool thing is the bill of material is going to be updating dynamically if I do parts only, right? Or top level, and readjust all that. So note, personal experience, if you're talking on the phone about the BOMs you need for a given job, don't do it in an airport. That's really exciting. Because our BOMs are different than TSA's BOMs. Any questions or comments? All right, thanks for your attention. Longest presentation I've ever given to a user group, full hour and 10 minutes. Thank you.